Hello folks, I hope that you are having just a great day today. I hope that's one of the best days that you've had, and if not, that it will become that before the end of the day. Today I want to take a look at Fred Saberhagen's Far Slayer's story. It's his second to last book in the Complete Book of Series. That began with the Complete Book of Swords trilogy, and then it has 8 books in the sequel series that we've been doing a deep dive into. It's been very influential in my life. It's very influential on Fred Saberhagen is very influential on fantasy and science fiction. And so we're taking a look at this book today, which I just finished last night, and it's the penultimate book of the series. And so we'll go ahead and kind of get started with it. Now, this stuff was originally written in the mid '80s. The first trilogy, the Complete Book of Swords, which I read when I was a kid in 5th grade. It was the first adult fiction that I read after reading The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I loved it a lot. It was very influential on me. Fred Saberhagen's Empire of the East is in Appendix N. Gygax is a list of heavily influential stuff on him when he created Dungeons & Dragons, and since he was the big influence on modern fantasy, it's through him that Fred Saberhagen has had some impact on fantasy. No doubt about it. And this is set in the same world that the Empire of the East is, although it's not a sequel. And you don't need to read it first because this is set like thousands and thousands of years in the future, and it's it's also very much more of just a pure fantasy story. This is a post-apocalyptic fantasy story that is set in Earth after a nuclear war has happened, and the nuclear war brought with it a change, and between the superpowers and that nuclear war brought with it a change, which has changed a lot of things, and there are some occasional things that survive from the old world, like old world lanterns, but for the most part, you have, by now, everything is magic. You've got dragons, you've got gods, you've got magic, you've got people, so it's definitely a fantasy world, and it feels like it too. A traditional epic heroic fantasy world. A little lower in magic than some. Enemies tend to be humans, rather than like orcs or anything like that. So it's a little bit of a lower magic fantasy setting, but definitely epic and still magic. So what winds up happening in the first book, what winds up happening in the prelude, Vulcan, one of the gods, has been tasked with creating a set of swords, god-forged swords that are created by Vulcan, each of which has a different set of powers. And a weakness to them, and he brings in humans. He sets up the forge in the first prelude to the first book. He brings in humans to slake the blades on their blood. All of them die except for a smith in a faraway village named Jord, who survives, but one of his arms is missing. He gets given one of the swords named Town Saver as payment for it. Town Saver ends up becoming the inheritance of his second-born son when his firstborn son dies, saving a town with Town Saver. Everybody in the gang that was attacking the town is dead, but the person who defended it also is dead too. It didn't defend him. It just killed anything that came his way. So he died, and so Mark heads off with the sword, the second-born of Jord, and will head off with the sword and flee the scene. And will be pursued by the people with the sword. It's a powerful sword, and so these 12 god-forged blades are set about as a god's game, different parts of the main continent, and that's the key parts of the story. Now, a key thing is going to happen in book 2. One of the key swords in book 2 is Far Slayer, which is the key sword of this book 2. The penultimate book. And Far Slayer basically is called the Sword of Wisdom, and basically it will let you find your heart's greatest desire. You can tell it what you want, and it will lead you to that direction. It'll point you in that direction. You just walk in that direction until it takes you where you're going. And the person who has it seeks to rob the Blue Temple, which is basically the bank of this world, of their vaunted treasure, and he joins up with a group of people, a wizard, some other folks, Ben and Mark, Mark, who's our protagonist for the series, and Ben, who's one of his best friends, are also going to join the expedition, and the expedition will head out to rob the temple. And Mark is going along because everybody's going along for different reasons, but basically that's the key concept of the second book of the series. Now, what winds up happening, spoiler, is that, and I've given you enough time, I'll say end spoilers, it's probably about 30 seconds. What ends up happening is that there are swords in the Blue Temple's treasury, and one of those, and the god Hermes was coming along to collect all the swords because the swords were doing some bad stuff. They were more powerful than expected. So he collects Wayfinder from the guy who has it, the leader of their expedition, the Baron. And Baron doesn't like that. So they find the Sword of Vengeance in the Sword of Vaults. He spins around and says and cries out its thing, for thy heart who has wronged me. And he flings out the sword, and the sword Farslayer flies out, and it kills the god. So a human has killed a god, Hermes, with the sword Farslayer, which nobody thought would happen. So surprise, surprise, a god just died from the swords, and the god's magic works. Okay, now, end spoilers, which is about 30 seconds later. So we find that out, and it's a key part of the series once that happens. But Wayfinder goes missing, and Wayfinder hasn't been heard or seen since. And so now we're going to move bunches of novels forward, and we've had a lot of things that have happened since then. Mark is still one of our key protagonists, although there are entire books that would go by that where he's not even mentioned, like Stonecutter's story, which I reviewed for you and I enjoyed. Where he's not part of the story, or Sightblinder's story, where he is captured in the first chapter by the big bad, and then you have to rescue him, and so you're following the people that are trying to rescue him with the sword Sightblinder. So in this book, basically we're going to set up, and Mark is the Prince of Tasselwalda. He's about 40 or 45. Whereas he was 12 in the first book, in the first chapter of the first book. So he's now a lot older, and we're going to open it up with a grape vineyard person, a new character that's been created called Valdemar, and Val will be he's a grape wine person. He's a guy who grows grapes and produces wine from them, and that's his job. And one night a package is left on his doorstep, and he grabs that package and brings it open, and it's Farslayer. I'm sorry, not Farslayer, it's Wayfinder, rather, which is the key part of the story. The sword of wisdom, which is, when pointed in the right direction, will determine his heart's desire. And what is our young Valdemar's biggest desire? A wife. So he sets out on a wife quest in order to find his wife, and Farslayer leads him towards him. Now, in the second chapter, we're going to come across two of our major characters in the sequel series. The former Silver Queen, Queen Yambu, who's about 40-45, although she looks 60 because she drew the sword Soulcutter, which drew her body. So she looks older than she actually is. And Zoltan, who is the Prince of Mark, and he is the one of the young scions of the key central state Tassavalta in the Lost Book of Sword series. And those two are following along, and in chapter 2 they're going to be brought back into the story, and they're both major characters or minor supporting characters that have had point of view characters at some point in time or other. And they're two important characters, and Voldemar's sword will lead them to that duo. It specifically leads them to the previous Silver Queen, Yambo, and after seeing the sword pointing directly at her, they talk, and eventually at the end of chapter 2, he gives her his sword so that she can use it to quest, and then he joins the two of them in their quest, believing that following them will lead him to his wife. And that's basically it. Valdemar's on a wife quest. And what does that mean? And who's his wife? And who's his actual proper person? The big bad is in this story too, in big numbers. You will follow along with him. His primary henchman, Tigris, is introduced in Far Slayer's story a few books prior and has been his primary henchman since then. Also has some key roles in this story too, and we'll get her comeuppance. Mark is back. The swords, shield breaker, sight grinder, wound healer, Wayfinder are all in this book too, and are being involved by different people in different ways as a part of the storyline. And there you are. I enjoyed it. I think it's a 7 out of 10. I do think there's a lot of fun stuff happening in this story. I think that Fred Saberhagen does a good job with it. So I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read Wayfinder's story or anything else in the series? I would be happy to engage you with it further in the comments below. If you like this video, please feel encouraged to hit that subscribe button. There's going to be a lot more of these to follow in fantasy, horror, and science fiction. And finally, I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video. We all have so many things that are happening in our lives, and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. Thanks again, and have a great day.